Mr. Baطrefy, what kind of a state do you think your country is now in? I know that Saudi Arabia is facing sliding oil prices and also disputes with with Iran, another Shia country in the Middle East. And what do you think a Chinese president's visit to your country will help you?
Well, Saudi Arabia have faced the same problems before. In the 80s, if you remember, the oil prices went down to almost $10, and Iran was, as usual, interfering in our affairs, and there was an attempt to terrorist attacks in Mecca, and then there was, again, they burned the Saudi embassy. And again, there was a disruption of relations. So nothing is new. I mean, this is the case in the Middle East. It's always up and down. But our relation with China is going up all the time since 2000 and the visit of late King Abdullah and then King Salman. The relation went from better to better all the time, and now it is at best, and of course it could go even more. China is the greatest, I believe, economy in the world, or going to be soon, and Saudi Arabia is the biggest exporter of oil and chemicals to China, and we have a lot to achieve, especially with the new project, one path or one road and one path, the Chinese building the Silk Road from China to Europe, going through Saudi Arabia.
And Mr. El-Soudari, you wrote a book on China's impression, the impression of the Saudis on China and the Chinese. What do you think are the main impression, Mr. El-Soudari? Well, it seems Mr. El-Soudari can't get audio from Beijing. Let's turn to Mr. Baطrefy again. Mr. Baطrefy, what is the average impression of Saudis of China and the Chinese investment? And you said it's been going up, but with sliding oil, do you think China can do more to diversify your economy?
Of course, China has been involved in many projects in Saudi Arabia, including peaceful nuclear energy. And China is a country that we can depend on to support our change of economy and into industrial and diversifying our economy away a little bit from oil. China has been a partner in many of our projects in Al Jubail and Yumbo, building factories, petrochemical factories, and helping us in our development. So I believe more of the same will do better for all. It's going to be good news for the Chinese economy and for ours.
Mr. Baطrefy just mentioned One Belt, One Road, which is a strategic project for China. Does it connect China and the Middle East better because of this project?
Yeah, of course.
What are the potential there?
I think as our Saudi friend has already mentioned that the Saudis, despite it is the largest oil exporters, but because of the lower oil prices, the Saudi at this moment is in a period of transition, try to transit. Mainly the economy depends on the export of oil, and is ended the process of industrializations. And China is good at and the building and also in these fields. So we can maybe cooperate with the Saudis. And China, it is beginning with this year, is start of the 13th five plan, and also the Saudis, starting from this year, is also launched new 5-year plan. So we can link the build the road the civil strategy together with the strategy of development of Saudis, because both sides the economy, the structure are very, can help each others. And China as the largest, the oil importer, as Saudi is the largest oil exporter. And they want a very stable oil market. And China also wants a stable oil providers. So I think, both sides can help each other, and also we can take the advantage of, the other sides.
Let's talk to Ms. Al-Sudari from Hong Kong here. We just have been talking about the economic transaction between China and Saudi Arabia. We agree that Saudi Arabia is facing the pressure of declining oil prices, but there is also chances, like China's One Belt, One Road. What is your take on the economic cooperation potential between the two? Mr. Al-Sudari.
Yes. Well, I mean, there are so many different dimensions and really fields for this type of economic engagement, really. I mean, it certainly goes well beyond the traditional energy-based engagement. I mean, for example, you have certainly cooperation in the field of clean energy. You have cooperation, for example, in nuclear power generation. I mean, China has already signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia to construct over 16 nuclear power plants in the country by 2030. I mean, there are many different arenas, really, and they are not just limited to energy, as I said. And certainly, of course, China can play
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yes, go ahead.
And China can also play, yes, and China, of course, can also engage Saudi Arabia using, for example, it's the Islamic connections and connectivities that exist between the two countries. I mean, the development and investments that China is making in Ningxia and the Xibei in general to attract Arab investment, to attract Arab tourists into that region is also one major connectivity that will occur under the rubric of the Silk Road project.
But the oil prices going down has already sabotaged Saudi's ability, especially in financing, right?
To a certain extent, but the kingdom, of course, still has a lot of reserves to keep it going, and it still has a lot of financial resources to draw upon over the coming period. And certainly a lot of experts and analysts don't suggest that these low oil prices are going to be a sustained phenomenon. We can very well see a rebound over the coming period. And this is one of the things that underlines Saudi Arabia's oil strategy in many ways, which is to maintain its market share until a coming rebound in the market.
And China has always been saying One Belt, One Road is to connect the regions and countries along the Asian Silk Road. Of course, Middle East is a big part of it. But what are the complementarities between China and the Middle East countries in terms of economic cooperation? What are the strong suits that those countries can use? Mr. Lee.
I think, as we said, after almost 5 years of instability, the people are tired. And all these three countries, President Xi is going to visit. They have all launched economic developments, a sort of a plan in order to raise the living standards for the people. And all three countries was ended the process of industrializations. And this is, we sort of not only to link with the One Belt, One Road, but also, the capacities of, the industry. And this is also very important. China will have the advantage in this field. For example, to build a kind of infrastructures and a kind of, the industrializations. And we have this kind of capability. We also have this kind of the money. We can work with them. And through this kind of cooperation, and the regional countries, they can build up a sort of new factories, and which will create a lot of new jobs for the youth, and also to help them to stabilize, the internal and the stabilities this is a part of what we are going to do to help to bring.
Mr. Baطrفي, do you think this is what you need? China has manufacturing capabilities and also financing. It can help your economy and also provide jobs for Saudis. Is this something that you're expecting? Baطrفي, Mr.
Yes, we are expecting this, and also we are expecting a place like China to invest our money. You know, we have about $700 billion in our investment fund, and we are looking for safe places for investment. SABCO and Aramco, SABIC and Aramco have went before and invested in China. One of those projects is $660 billion in China, and there are more.
So if you're
come.
investing the money, what
I think
areas are you
both
looking
countries
at?
will benefit from.
What areas?
They are looking in petroleum, there is a project in petroleum, in petrochemicals, and in high tech also. There is a project in China for $60 million for building a high-tech institute. So whatever China could afford us of opportunities to invest our money, I think China is one of the safest places in the world to invest in. And the new trend now is to have more risk in our investments, and China, I believe, will provide us with profitable investment and less risk than any other places.
I want to talk a little bit about geopolitics. China has always kept a distance from geopolitics in different parts of the world, but this time around, the high-profile visit of President Xi, do you think China can play a more constructive role in helping tone down the tensions in the Middle East, the rows between your country and Iran? Mr. Baطrفي?
Yes, I believe they could, but I would believe they could do more if they stop supporting the Syrian regime, killing its people in Syria. That's making bad effect on China's image in the Arab world and the Muslim world. And there will be more of neutral broker if they stop supporting Iran and Syria in this project.
Mr. Al-Sudari, what is your take on China's role in helping toning down tensions and maybe mediating different parties?
Well, I mean, honestly, I've heard this narrative being repeated in many different media outlets, that is to say that China wishes to play a mediating role between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I think this is sort of somewhat off the mark insofar as, yes, China over the last 10, 15 years has played an extremely constructive role in many different peacemaking contexts in Afghanistan and Sudan, its attempt in 2013 with regards to the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations, its hosting of the Syrian opposition talks in Beijing recently. But I think at this juncture, there is not much receptivity for a Chinese mediating role between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this has more to do with the regional actors than, say, willingness on China's part.
And Mr. Lee, do you think so?
I think, the very, the role China can play in the Middle East, because this is our policies, will encourage the regional countries, especially as you mentioned, the Saudi Arabia and the Iran, maybe to adopt the sort of a policy and of set down, their differences while seeking the common interests. And we also would encourage both countries to sit down, to enter into the negotiations through dialogue to resolve their problems.
But in what capacity? As a communicator or as a mediator?
I don't believe China would act as a kind of mediator. But we, of course, we would encourage both sides to take whatever, the measures or means, try, to solve their problems through peaceful, through dialogue, through diplomatic channels.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, and thank you, Mr. Al-Sudari and Mr. Baطrفي, for your analysis on this. And you're now watching World